Support for Amanpour comes from our friends at Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans, who are excited to introduce their all-new Rate Shield approval. If you're in the market to buy a home, Rate Shield approval is a real game changer, and here's why. First, Quicken Loans will lock your rate for up to 90 days while you shop. But here's the crucial part. If rates go up, your rate stays the same. But if rates go down, your rate also drops. Either way, you win. It's the kind of thinking you'd expect from America's largest mortgage lender. To get started, go to rocketmortgage.com/Amanpour. When you think of the things you do every day, brushing your teeth probably isn't top of mind. But for something that's so important to your health, it should be. That's why Quip wants to help you brush better. Quip is an electric toothbrush that's a fraction of the cost of bulkier brushes, while still packing just the right amount of vibrations to help clean your teeth. Quip's built-in timer helps you clean for the dentist-recommended 2 minutes with guiding pulses that remind you when to switch sides. Next, quick subscription plans are for your health, not just for convenience. They deliver new brush heads on a dentist-recommended schedule every 3 months for just $5, including free shipping worldwide. Quip also comes with a mount that suctions right to your mirror and unsticks to use as a cover for hygienic travel wherever you take your teeth. And finally, everyone loves Quip. They were on Oprah's O List, named one of Time's best inventions, and is the first subscription electric toothbrush accepted by the American Dental Association. Plus, they're backed by a network of over 20,000 dentists and hygienists, and hundreds of thousands of happy brushers use Quip every day. Quip starts at just $25. And if you go to getquip.com/Amanpour right now, you'll get your first refill pack free with a Quip electric toothbrush. That's your first refill pack free at getquip.com/Amanpour. Spelled GETQUIP.com/Amanpour.
He was President Obama's right-hand man, serving as trusted advisor throughout his term. Ben Rhodes opens up about life inside the White House, the decisions that shaped Syria, Russia, and Iran, and how Barack Obama really felt about Donald Trump's election. Everyone, and welcome to the program. I'm Christiane Amanpour in London. President Donald Trump has a huge European trip coming up next week, with what's shaping up to be a contentious NATO summit in Brussels, followed by a visit to Britain, where he's likely to be met with massive protests, and a one-on-one meeting with Vladimir Putin in Helsinki. That could create even more tension with America's Western allies. The relationship between the United States and Europe has not been this fraught since the George W. Bush years and the rift over the Iraq War. Repairing that rift and restoring America's global reputation was a critical focus for the Barack Obama administration. And my guest, Ben Rhodes, was at the heart of all of that. As Deputy National Security Advisor and as foreign policy speechwriter, Rhodes served as Obama's sounding board and spokesman for 8 very full years. And in his new book, The World as It Is Inside the Obama White House, Rhodes takes us into the inner sanctum for a glimpse at how the Obama presidency worked. It's impossible to read his book, though, without being struck by just how much of what Barack Obama did is being undone by his successor, Donald Trump. And so we begin by reliving some of the most memorable Trump reversals.
Today, the world has officially crossed the threshold for the Paris Agreement to take effect.
As of today, the United States will cease all implementation of the non-binding Paris Accord.
Today, the United States, together with our allies and partners, has reached a historic understanding with Iran.
I am announcing today that the United States will withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal.
Today, as the President of the United States of America, I offer the Cuban people el saludo de paz.
Effective immediately, I am canceling the last administration's completely one-sided deal with Cuba.
Ben Rhodes, welcome to the program.
Thank you for that welcome, Christiane.
would almost be like a stand-up comedy routine if it wasn't so serious. What goes through your mind when you see those signature achievements of President Obama all overturned?
Well, first of all, look, it's disappointing. It's sad to have worked so hard on things, to see somebody attacking them really there's no unifying principle that would make those decisions for you other than Obama did this, so I'm going to undo it. I do think, if I look at the three, because Paris was brought into force, as he announced, the rest of the world is still in it. And the United States can come back in.
And the U.S., by the way, is implementing it on a state and city level.
Exactly. So, the Cuba opening, he said he canceled it. No, we still have an embassy there. He's just not moving it forward. The Iran deal is a little bit more black and white. We're out, and frankly, I don't think that deal can survive without us. So it's a bit mixed. Trump likes the theater of I'm undoing all these things. But the world is a little more complicated than that.
So before we plunge into some of the more sort of atmospherics, let's just quickly take the Iran deal, because that was a signature of President Obama. And in fact, even in his campaign, he said, I will negotiate with countries like Iran and North Korea. Right now, you're seeing President Trump threaten his allies, saying that they must cease all, for instance, oil imports from Iran. They must cease doing any business in dollars with Iran. Europe, the allies, are in a position of having to sort of side with Iran to try to figure out how to save the deal. And their companies don't know which way is up. And it just seems like an unprecedented fight between allies.
Yeah. Well, and the irony of it is that for Trump to do the things that he says he wants to do, to impose those sanctions to pressure Iran, he needs allies more than ever. When we imposed the sanctions on Iran, they only worked because Europe came along, China came along. He's making it impossible to accomplish what he wants, which is to pressure Iran more. So he's got the worst of both worlds. He's potentially losing the constraints in the nuclear deal, and he's losing the ability to bring the rest of the world along with him to pressure Iran.
President Trump keeps saying, you see, since I was tough with Iran and I pulled out of this, they've changed their behavior in Syria. They're changing their behavior. They're not looking so aggressively at the Mediterranean. And I think they really believe that there'll be regime change in Iran. That's what they want, the administration. How do you analyze those, first of all, those statements and what might happen inside Iran?
Well, I think he's lying. I mean, as a matter of fact, I don't see any change in Iranian behavior. If anything, we've seen the supreme leader say that we should restart our nuclear program. Regime change has been kind of the fantasy of parts of the American right and Prime Minister Netanyahu for many years. This is not a regime that is about to collapse. And frankly, I think if somehow there was regime collapse, the people who would emerge from that are the worst people. The IRGC, the Revolutionary Guard there.
President Obama didn't have a very good personal relationship with Prime Minister Netanyahu. Now Prime Minister Netanyahu is thrilled to bits because he thinks he has his ally in the White House. Do you see this Middle East policy being directed by the Israeli Prime Minister?
I think the two most important people in American Middle East policy are Mohammed bin Salman and Bibi Netanyahu.
The Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia.
The Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia and the Prime Minister of Israel. I think they are driving this. If you look at essentially the gloves are off completely in Yemen, the spat with Qatar, the bizarre episode with the Prime Minister of Lebanon, that is Mohammed bin Salman unconstrained with the full support of the United States. And if you see the American embassy moving to Jerusalem and then the killing of those Palestinians in Gaza, that is Bibi Netanyahu feeling unconstrained. And so I do think that in the absence of a lot of any real vision or strategic clarity out of Washington, that Middle East policy has been essentially outsourced to Riyadh and Jerusalem.
Do you take any sense of responsibility for that? Famously, the Saudis believed that President Obama was abandoning the region, whether it was selling the ally Hosni Mubarak of Egypt down the line, or whether it was pulling back from the red line that President Obama himself established over Syria, or whether it was, as they think, cozying up to Iran at the expense of the Gulf allies. Do you take any responsibility for the tension in the region?
Well, I wrestled with this a lot in writing my book. I mean, I think that in the Arab Spring, at the outset of the Arab Spring, we broke with Mubarak, and President Obama took a very dramatic step that angered the Gulf countries very much. We never really followed through. We got caught kind of in the middle, which is not where you want to get in foreign policy, on Egypt in particular, because he made the dramatic break from Mubarak, but then we kind of reverted to form in terms of supporting the Egyptian military, having that be our principal interlocutor in the country, as they're sidelining secular activists and making this kind of a binary Muslim Brotherhood or us choice, which is what the Gulf countries wanted. And the Gulf countries ultimately poured a lot of money into Egypt to help put the military back in control. I think we never really repaired that breach, nor did we actually truly follow through on the democracy promotion in Egypt. That's the one that actually, it's not the one that people think of, it's the one I look at and think about what could we have done differently. On Iran, we just, we had a different view. It's not that we wanted to be friends with Iran, it's that we thought a nuclear deal was the best way to stop them from getting a nuclear weapon. They basically wanted to have this war across the region between Saudi Arabia and Iran and all their proxies. We thought that was not in U.S. interest or frankly in their interest.
Let's just get back then to election night. Yeah. I'm going to play a little bit of a Netflix documentary that caught you on election night.
Just came outside to try to process all this. It's a lot to process. I mean, I can't even.
Ben Rhodes, uncharacteristically stumped and silenced.
Yeah.
What did the president feel? How did you all process it?
Yeah, the president, he called me that night of the election, and his first response was kind of, well, that happened. I mean, he literally said that, like, we were shell-shocked, As I'm walking home that night, he sent me this email that said, there are more stars in the sky than grains of sand on the earth, groping for the biggest possible perspective that we can not be too overwhelmed by this result. Then he went through the process that all of us did. Could the Clinton campaign have done better? How much did the Russian meddling matter? The Comey letter? But then he got more philosophical about this, and he made a couple of comments, that I opened my book with that stuck in my mind. One is he said, perhaps I was 10 or 20 years too early. Speaking really of the demographics of the country, that demographically, a guy like Trump can't get elected 10 or 20 years from now, when, it's going to be a minority white country, essentially, and you can't have a whole coalition that's kind of rooted in a sense of white grievance. The other thing he said is, what if we were wrong? What if people want to fall back into their tribe?
He obviously had some words with President Trump during that first meeting a couple of days after the election. I guess, how did he feel that the man who had questioned his very birthright, the man who claimed that he was a Muslim or whatever, was actually his successor? And that's one question. And then I just go to, let me ask you that one first.
He was very disappointed by it. I mean, because again, what he was most disappointed by is he's like, I worked so hard to take this office seriously and to carry myself with a certain dignity. And so it wasn't just the insults that, to him, it was that Trump was such a fundamentally kind of unserious person, that the stewardship of that office, was being handed over to somebody who wasn't going to take it as seriously. I think that's what bothered him.
Support for Amanpour comes from our friends at Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans. Let's talk about buying a home for a minute. Because of rising interest rates, there's a lot of unpredictability when it comes to buying a home these days. It's causing a lot of anxiety with folks. Well, our friends at Quicken Loans are doing something about that. They're calling it the power buying process. Here's how it works. Quicken Loans will verify your income, assets, and credit in less than 24 hours to give you a verified approval. This gives you the strength of a cash buyer. Then, once you're verified, you qualify for their all-new exclusive Rate Shield approval. First, they'll lock your rate for up to 90 days while you shop. Now here's the best part. If rates go up, your rate stays the same. But if rates go down, your rate also drops. Either way, you win. It's the kind of thinking you'd expect from America's largest mortgage lender. To get started, go to rocketmortgage.com/Amanpour. Rate Shield approval only valid on certain 30-year purchase transactions. Additional conditions or exclusions may apply. Based on Quicken Loans data in comparison to public data records. Equal housing lender, licensed in all 50 states. NMLSconsumeraccess.org number 3030. When you think of the things you do every day, brushing your teeth probably isn't top of mind. But for something that's so important to your health, it should be. That's why Quip wants to help you brush better. Quip is an electric toothbrush that's a fraction of the cost of bulkier brushes, while still packing just the right amount of vibrations to help clean your teeth. Quip's built-in timer helps you clean for the dentist-recommended 2 minutes with guiding pulses that remind you when to switch sides. Next, Quick subscription plans are for your health, not just for convenience. They deliver new brush heads on a dentist-recommended schedule every 3 months for just $5, including free shipping worldwide. Quip also comes with a mount that suctions right to your mirror and unsticks to use as a cover for hygienic travel wherever you take your teeth. And finally, everyone loves Quip. They were on Oprah's O List, named one of Time's best inventions, and is the first subscription electric toothbrush accepted by the American Dental Association. Plus, they're backed by a network of over 20,000 dentists and hygienists, and hundreds of thousands of happy brushers use Quip every day. Quip starts at just $25. And if you go to getquip.com/Amanpour right now, you'll get your first refill pack free with a Quip electric toothbrush. That's your first refill pack free at getquip.com/Amanpour. Spelled GETQUIP.com/Amanpour. Been putting off buying new glasses? Zenni Optical offers a huge variety of high-quality, stylish frames and state-of-the-art optics starting at just $6.95. We've got all the great frame styles you want in materials like titanium, carbon fiber, and high-luster acetate. Plus, Zenni offers prescription glasses and sunglasses. So at this great price, you can build your eyewear wardrobe. You can get 10% off your entire order with code 360. So visit Zenni, Zenni, today at zennioptical.com and use code 360.
President Obama, you quote in the book, is calling President Trump a cartoon character, more concerned about his crowd size than serious policy. So one of the policies which he railed against and still rails against is Obamacare. And this is what President Obama says that he told him about it. I said to the incoming president, just change the name and claim that you made these wonderful changes.
Yeah, call it Trump Care. He called me up to the Oval Office, a couple of us, after that meeting with Trump, and he was really kind of bemused. He looked kind of confused, shocked, and I said, well, what happened in the meeting? And he said, well, first of all, he kept wanting to steer the conversation back to his crowd size. I'm trying to brief him on healthcare and immigration policy, and
North Korea.
And he's saying, you and I could get big crowds, but, Hillary, do you see she couldn't get the same crowds, right? And then, Trump would act very open to his ideas on healthcare and immigration. And, Obama would say to him, like, well, yeah, just make a few changes, call it Trump Care, But in retrospect, clearly, Trump had no intention of being open to those policies. I think his manner, as a lot of foreign leaders have experienced, I've heard from, is that in the meeting he can be quite solicitous at times, and then he goes out and says something totally different.
And President Trump really sort of looks like he's on a binge to disrupt the alliances, to change or completely destroy the sort of so-called 70-year global liberal world order.
Right.
President Obama said that he had advised, for instance, President Trudeau, Prime Minister Trudeau, to speak up more vocally and to defend shared values. I wonder what you think when you see President Trudeau having done that at the G7 summit and then being literally abused by President Trump via Twitter storm, being called dishonest and weak and all the rest of it. What are allies meant to do, do you think?
You know what? I think they have to stand up for what they believe. We've seen different approaches. We saw President Macron, who I have huge admiration for, try very, very hard to build a relationship, a personal relationship. But all the things that he cared about, the Iran deal, the Paris Climate Agreement, avoiding a trade war, Trump ignored it. So I don't think just going the route of flattery and reaching out, at a certain point, I think, you're going to see allies say, if we can't count on the Americans to be with us, which I would obviously prefer as an American, they're going to have to stand up to Trump. And I think that's going to happen more and more over the course of this year because people have seen he's made his choice. And his choice is to pick these fights with us and to walk away from that liberal order.
So tell me then about the grand dame of Europe, the European leader, Chancellor Angela Merkel. You talk a lot about, in the book, about that last meeting and that, President Obama said, Angela, she's alone now. And as they parted, there was one tear in her eye. And you say you'd never seen her so emotional ever. She was stoic. And describe how she must be feeling and what President Obama thinks of her now being beaten up on Twitter by the President of the United States.
Look, Angela Merkel is a great woman and a great and historical figure. And for someone like that who has weathered all of these crises and been shoulder to shoulder with the United States and standing up to Putin and helped rescue the global economy in the Eurozone crisis, taking in all these refugees, showing what the true meaning, I think, of Western values are by welcoming people into Germany. To have now an American president literally attacking her, an American ambassador who's actively trying to undermine her, she deserves far better than this. This is a woman who's been with us. And I think the rest of the world is going to look at this and say, well, can we trust America anymore? If this is how they treat their friends, the people who've stood by their side, can we trust them?
President Trump himself has made the 2% of GDP for the NATO budget a hallmark, and we've got a NATO summit coming up next week. He's obviously going to put that on the table again. Of course, it started under President Obama, the NATO summit, I think in 2014, where they insisted on this 2%.
Here in the UK.
Here in the UK, in fact. Do you fear, is there a fear that the United States might, under Trump, pull out of NATO or abandon Article 5? I mean, he did reinforce it last summit, last year, but have things changed?
I think they have. I mean, look, he reaffirmed it, but he clearly seemed to be dragged to the position of reaffirming it. He seems more intent on beating up on NATO allies. I think we'll stay in. But the question is, if you're an Eastern European country and your survival depends on that Article 5 commitment, and you're seeing the President of the United States kind of hedge about it, and you've got Putin bearing down, I think you're going to be much more susceptible, potentially, to Russian influence. I think some of those countries will stand up to Putin, but some of them, you've already seen, are beginning to develop their own independent relationships with Putin and with Russia. And so the danger, I feel, is not that NATO collapses, but that once that Article 5 commitment doesn't feel firm to people, and frankly, the U.S. is really the guarantor of it, you're going to see less investment from countries. And we've gotten more out of those countries than Trump likes to act like they've done nothing for us. The only time Article 5 was invoked was on 9/11. They didn't want to be in Afghanistan. Their publics didn't want to be there, and yet they fought and died with us there. The next time we need them, they're probably not going to be with us, and so that's how it's going to hurt us.
You just mentioned President Putin. The next big meeting is going to be between President Trump and President Putin in Helsinki in a couple of weeks from now. There's all sorts of expectations and sort of, trying to think what this meeting is going to be about and who's going to give what to whom. One of them suggests that President Trump, egged on by Bibi Netanyahu and the Saudis, are going to try to ask Putin to get Iran out of Syria in return for America allowing Assad to stay in place.
Yeah.
Have you heard that?
Yes, yeah. And potentially some recognition of Crimea.
Recognition of Crimea as well.
Bolton kind of dangled that recently.
Deputy Secretary of State said to me, no way.
I would think no way. But that's what the Russians are going to want, right? Look, I think that's right. I think that the Saudis, the Emiratis, the Israelis have had this idea of some play where essentially they can realign with Putin. It ignores the reality that we butted up against and failed, completely failed.
Yeah, because you were all in for Putin during the Syria.
We tried and failed. And
big time.
Yes, and people can hold us to account. It was only, the only course we could find to diplomacy to deal with Assad had to involve the Russians. I think you can find mistakes along the way there, including at the beginning of the conflict. We can go back to this, but I don't know that we moved aggressively enough at the beginning before things really went into an all-out civil war there to forestall that. By the time we were really engaging the Russians on this in a really aggressive way late in our administration, it was in some ways too late.
I detect a certain movement of your position. You talk about we should have potentially gone in somehow and been more aggressive, before this turned into a massive civil war. Your administration has been criticized amongst many in the foreign policy establishment and many in the region for failing in Syria. And you've always defended what you've done there.
Yeah.
So do you think you should have done something different at the beginning?
Everybody focuses on the military question, which, we've debated, Christian, many times. There was also the question of, at the beginning, we probably presumed that Assad was going to go. We had, Mubarak had gone, Ben Ali, Saleh, and we moved pretty quickly to call for him to go. But by doing that, without a clear strategy that we're going to put means behind to remove him, we kind of closed the diplomatic window in a way. Our ability to make some deal with the Syrians and the Iranians and the Gulf countries and everybody in the region about how to potentially forestall this civil war, we kind of lost that window of opportunity. probably because we were reading the events as leading to Assad falling, right? The Russians and Iranians, though, were backing him in a way that none of those other leaders had support. I think people can go back and question every step along the way, including the red line, but I actually think people should look at, to get the diplomacy wrong at the beginning, but sometimes, the best thing you can do is stop the war before it happened. Maybe we couldn't, but I think we should look back at 2011, 2012 and at least consider it.
And you sort of said the red line under your breath, but of course that is what everybody points to this administration for. It's big failure. The big thing is going to have to be answerable. The big opening it gave to Assad, to Iran, to Russia. And of course the region taking its cue about your administration from that failure. And even allies believe that as isolationist and as America first and go it aloneist as the Trump administration is, that they trace the pullback to that failure to enact your own red line. Yeah. Are you prepared to admit that that was a massive strategic failure?
So I took people into the decision-making after the red line attack. And I think new details about what Obama was dealing with, which is essentially, he's already skeptical that you can solve this with our military. Iraq and Afghanistan weighed heavily on him. There we had huge deployments of those troops and couldn't fix those countries. Then he's thinking, what do I need in place for a military intervention to potentially succeed? I need some domestic support and international support. And that week after that attack, it didn't materialize. Internationally, the British Parliament voted against joining us. Angela Merkel called him and said she couldn't support military action publicly unless the UN investigation was done. At home, the Republicans were saying it'd be an unconstitutional act without congressional authorization. And as unsatisfying as it is, I also think it is true that Obama is weighing not just whether there's a case for intervention, but if I intervene like this, can it work?
And it'll be for the history books. Endless studies will be done on that. But let's now talk about the trade war. Which everybody thought President Trump was just using rhetoric. It was a negotiating tactic. But actual sums and numbers are now being flung around. Actual allies and competitors are threatening retaliation. And he says things like, I didn't even know when I talked to Prime Minister Trudeau. I just made it up. I just said we had a deficit. I didn't know. He says that, all these things. It's fascinating to read what you wrote about the meeting with President Xi of China when you were with President Obama. And this is what he said about Trump. We prefer to have a good relationship with the United States, but every action will have a reaction. And if an immature leader throws the world into chaos, then the world will know whom to blame. I thought that was one of the most interesting comments by a leader in your whole book.
It's totally haunting. And this is in November of 2016, right at the election. And Obama was warning him about trade. I think Trump is serious about this trade. And Xi looked comfortable. He kind of sat back, folded his hands, and he'd take a measure of this. And what he was saying is exactly what's happened, which is that if Trump goes down this road, we're going to take your place. We're going to pick off your allies. We're going. They have a One Belt, One Road initiative that extends all the way from China to Africa, through Southeast Asia and Central Asia and the Middle East. And he knew that it would be an opportunity for him. Yes, there's risk with Trump picking a trade war with him, but China can beat the United States in a trade war because they don't have politics, right? So, they can assume a lot of pain. But when they start squeezing pieces of the American electorate, they know that American politicians are going to back down. So he's sitting in a much stronger position. The only way to actually have a trade war with China is to get all your allies on your side. And Trump has given away the only leverage that he could really have.
By threatening a trade war against his own allies.
His own allies. Europe, Japan, Korea. Canada. So what you'll see, and suddenly, if you notice, Christian, you've been covering this for so long, but the Chinese leader is suddenly the spokesperson for globalization. He's showing up at Davos and talking about free trade and saying about the WTO, and that is very deliberate. China wants to make maximum use of these Trump years to do as much as possible to reorient the international order and the global economy to be anchored in their view of how things should work.
I almost don't dare ask you where you see light on the horizon. But I will ask you at the end of this conversation about a really sweet sort of retrospective when President Obama came over here and went to Buckingham Palace and, of course, met the Queen. They really bonded.
Yeah, he really loved the Queen. And I describe him, after the first dinner at Buckingham Palace, we sat next to her all night, and he said, they just chatted about, first of all, she'd met every person there was to meet for the last 60 years. He's like, this is the only person you can talk to who's literally known everybody. But the other thing he said that was really interesting is that she reminded him of his grandmother, who raised him, who was kind of a tough, pragmatic but plain-spoken woman, he really saw the person who he loved as much as anybody in the world in the Queen. So it was that interesting juxtaposition of a woman who's met everybody, but also a woman who's so plain-spoken and commonsensical that she reminds him of his grandmother.
And how do you think the meeting between President Trump and the Queen will go?
Oh, I'm going to tell you, I think that the Queen takes the measure of people pretty quickly, and she doesn't suffer fools. So, she'll be highly appropriate, I'm sure, but I don't think it'll be as warm as the relationship with the Obamas.
And what's next for you after 8 years of being right at the center of power and decision-making? What happens next for Ben Rhodes?
Yeah, well, I've caught up on some sleep and written this book. I've told my own story now. I'd like to tell other people's stories. I'm going to try to do some more writing.
Foreign policy writing?
Foreign policy, but also I want to get at the stories of people around the world. How are they impacted by these policies? My friends have a podcast that I might join them in the Pod Save America group.
Yes.
So I want to try other projects, and I want to try. I worked for somebody and spoke for somebody else for a decade, and now it's kind of liberating to be able to do my own thing for a little while.
We're going to say goodbye watching those amazing pictures of the president with your infant daughter lying on the ground
at
the Oval Office. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
There. And the other one when he's,
the
just
elephant
lying.
costume, yeah.
Look at that.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
All right, Ben Rhodes, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And with that tour around the world, that is it for our program. And remember, you can always listen to our podcast and see us online at amanpour.com. And you can always follow me on Facebook and Twitter. Thanks for watching, and goodbye from London.